Okay, folks, how you doing? I'm Pete Verdone. If anyone doesn't know me, I talk a lot on the internet about bike stuff. Who's familiar with my webpage? Got a few people. Okay, who watched last year's seminar that I gave here? Okay, we got two people. Good. So those two people already know they shouldn't have come. No, we'll make this good. It's going to go long. I'm a long-form guy. Okay, last year's seminar was about modern bicycle design and engineering, and I started with that, although this is the seminar people would probably actually want last year, because I wanted to talk about a way of thinking, and that I think is a bit missing sometimes in cyclecraft and all that stuff. But this time we're going to talk about geometry, because while people like to talk about geometry, it seems almost no people that talk about geometry have any idea what they're talking about. And so I'm trying to bring a different way of looking at it that might be more useful or accurate. Okay? So there we go. This is our thing. If you have any questions after this, I'm probably going to go about an hour and a half, 2 hours long. But if you still have questions or want to go even deeper, tomorrow at 8 a.m. at the Starbucks at 1201 Market, I'll hang out there before the show. You can ask me more questions after you've thought about it, no problem. Okay, if you come away from here with any thought, I'd love you to think these two thoughts: that I'm wrong and that you're going to prove me wrong, because that's what we need more of. Proof, right there. I want to see proof that I'm wrong. That's the greatest gift you can give me, because then I'll learn and grow. That's what we should always want, is someone to prove us wrong. Because if we just walk along continuing to do the same stuff that's wrong and nobody's shown us a different path, we're stuck, and that's not good. Okay, Mike Burrows died this year. I don't know if any of you know who Mike Burrows was. He was I believe most of his big career, he was a designer at Giant, and he was into HB, human-powered vehicles, and some other stuff like that, recumbent type things. But he did a lot of bicycle design that ended up in production at times and whatnot. But so he deserves a lot of respect for that, especially along people that think the way I do and stuff. But one thing I will say about Mike, and that the gift he gave me, I've read several of his books. There's a big mystery about the velocipede that came up in 1817. It magically appeared. This inventor guy just says, look what I've got. I've got a running bike thing or whatever like that. And nobody really knows where it came out of, because this dandy guy that was wealthy just kind of came up with this thing. And Burroughs speculated that this didn't come from carts. It came from wheelbarrows. And that if you're working people on a crew harvesting stone or wood, you're going to be using a single-track vehicle to get that stuff out of the woods or wherever you're at. And one person can run a wheelbarrow, but it's a lot of work. And then you can add a second person. It makes the work lighter with one wheel to get down a single-track path. But what happens is if you add a second wheel to that, then you no longer need two people to carry very heavy loads. And then, of course, after work, you get drunk and race the stupid thing, because that's what we always do. So that's really cool, a different way of thinking it. And it was the only place I've ever heard it was from Mike talking about that. And for that, I'll definitely be grateful to him. I'm going to talk about bike geometry. Here's a drawing of a bike. To me, that's what I should be seeing from anybody that wants to talk about bicycle geometry. Now, this has everything I would expect to see. I intentionally made sure that this was all monochromatic and would be overwhelming to you when you look at that, because that's a sea of numbers and lines that don't mean anything to you, and it is very distracting. But we're going to clarify what that means and what's being said in that. And what I'm talking about will get to the point, if you're familiar enough with bike geometry, you should be able to pick out any of those numbers on that field and describe to me all kinds of things about it, because there's a huge amount of information that's being conveyed there. And I know most of you have never seen a drawing this detailed before. Now, this is also very different from some of those drawings where someone went through BikeCAD and just clicked every box. That's not what this is. All the boxes I clicked here are very specific and for a reason. Okay. One of the things that makes bike geometry difficult to understand for a lot of people, and myself, I'm not an exception, is there's an ambiguity and morass of variables. There are so many variables that we're dealing with. I'm not going to read through every one of these, so while I'm ranting on, you folks can just look at this and kind of get ideas. There's so many variables and different things happening. One of the problems with what I specialize in, tilt steer vehicles, bicycles, motorcycles, and skateboards, I have my skateboard here with 3D printed trucks and custom shape and everything like that I get into. Bicycles, motorcycles, and skateboards, they're all tilt steer vehicles. The rider is an integral part of the handling and dynamic system and how it works. Your particular style will override lots of geometric variables or push it in ways that another rider, it will feel different on, right? So we're never gonna get to the bottom of this. Even if we start getting to higher levels, there'll still be more levels. Or if we make a geometry that's capable of riding faster, people will always want to ride even faster than that. So it's a problem we're never gonna solve. And if you have a problem with ambiguity, this is certainly not a subject you wanna study much, because you're always gonna be living in an ambiguous environment. And also, when you make small changes, there's knock-on effects that show up later. Small changes in head angle might result in a huge amount of flop change or front wheel trail change. So when you change one variable, oftentimes 2 to 3 or 4 other variables will start changing that you didn't want to change, and you're starting to chase around and do that. But you want to understand the meaning of each. So even if there's knock-on effects or there's a sea of numbers and everything like that, you want to get to the bottom of what each one does so you can kind of make your rock soup how you want to make your rock soup, right? And then it's right here, experience with engineering, riding various. How does a novice get started? You get started by getting started. That's how you get started. And the thing is, it's like you just need to start doing it and then you'll begin. And one thing that I was going over last night in my head, I was trying to understand how to communicate this. And I searched for it and I found it, this term called spiraling cognition, where there's ways of learning things where you begin at the beginning and you end at the end, and there's step, 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 and there you are. And that's really nice when you can study something like that. This kind of thing will end up being a spiraling cognition thing where you end up looping around and back and you get back to the beginning, but you know more than you did on the first loop. So you go into the next loop armed with that, and you keep doing that. I've started over my drawings in the last 20-something years over and over again, almost annually, and built them back up from scratch. And each time I do it with a much better level of understanding. But then I find a year later, I think I need to start over again. And that's the kind of subject we're talking about. It's spiraling cognition rather than a very linear cognition level, right? So you need to just get comfortable with this ambiguous environment where you just are constantly starting over, but you're doing it in a productive and meaningful way. You're getting a little better each time around the sun type of thing, okay? Anyone have any questions about that? Okay, cool. When we work with a bicycle geometry, or we're setting up a bike, or you're a racer or a rider or a builder or something like that, you're going to have goals. You don't just build a bike, you want it to do something. You want to do something well, or you want to do several things well. So what's the bike expected to do well? It's nice to write this stuff down. You know, it's okay to write more stuff down. People don't write stuff down enough. But if you can have it really spelled out, I want this to do well. Just write that sentence. I want it to go uphill well. You know, boom, there you go. Or I want to do double centuries. That's my goal. That's what I want this to do well. Nothing else. Or I want it to do double centuries and go get coffee. You know, it's like, well, at least if you write it down, it might be a hard thing to attain, but if you write it down, you can keep looking at it. It's like a mission statement. It's like you can keep, when you get lost and distracted and go down wormholes and whatnot, you can always come back to that and go, that's what I want it to do well. Is this all serving that? Okay, and then there, like within cycling, especially, like this is a North American example, but we have a very regionalistic approach. That's why generally we have certain types of builds and certain types of environment. Like a Pacific Northwest bike is going to be very different from a Northern California bike, which is going to be very different from a Florida bike. Those are very different, and this is both road and off-road type of situations. It's very different conditions, very different topography. So much is different about, these are the 5 I kind of picked out as major kind of regional places that might really influence the shape of a bike and the decisions that a designer is going to be making. There's another idea that I like to do myself is when I'm putting together a bike for myself or maybe helping a friend, because I'm not in business or anything like that, is I try to put a bike together around the weaknesses of the rider, not the strengths of a rider. Like if you're a hammerhead and you beat all your friends up to the top of the hill, well, it might be cool to have a bike that's even better for getting up to the top of the hill. Well, typically riders like that really stink at going down the hill. And it would be, if you've already got this surplus ability to get up the hill, maybe a bike that goes downhill better would be a better bike for that rider that gets up the hill, because then they can start learning to ride downhill or at least have a little bit more of a crutch, because they're already waiting for all their friends at the top of the hill. They've already got that covered. You can shave off a little there. Versus, because I see too many people maybe building around the strength of the rider, and it's like, oh, you're good at downhill, so you want a bike that's definitely a downhill bike, and it's like, no, a lot of downhill guys or girls really stink at going up the hill, and maybe that's where they need the help, and they can underbike on the downhill and still shred, right? So that's a really good idea and something worth trying if you haven't. We also talk about margin of error with this. So there's hitting your target, and then there's kind of being around your target. And when we make a bike, generally, and I'm generally going to have an off-road bias. That's my area of most expertise. I mean, I know enough about road, but like for mountain, 99% of a ride is going to be in relatively benign conditions. You know, it's nothing too extreme for 99% of the ride. Maybe if you live some sick place like Whistler and you're on the chairlift, that might not be true. But for any sort of pedal trail environment, it's like you're cruising along, and then there's that sick drop. But if you think about it time-wise, all the time you spent hucking to flat is like 0.1% of your ride, right? So while it's nice to have a bike that's well-tuned for that area, it's good to also think about the 99% of your ride. Also, within our geometry decisions, we can also make mistakes hard to make. Back in the day, riders like Sam Hill or Steve Peat rode 26-inch mountain bikes that I would never want to take down a hill in my life now. Knowing what I know now and what I'm used to now, I would never ride one of those horrific death machines that they were riding way faster than I could ever imagine on, right? Now, the margin of error for riding a bike like they were riding is very, very small compared to a modern downhill bike where the margin of error is much, much greater. And there's a lot more tolerance for mistakes. Of course, they're going to push it even further because of that and start closing it down with faster speeds. But the thing is, it's like nowadays, especially in dirt, making a mistake is harder to do just from a geometric point of view. Okay? And that's something we can really think about if we understand the geometry. This is a visual kind of look at it because, you know, I might refer to racers because racers are on the front page and all that stuff. They're easy to see. But this is just a spider graph of optimization that you can think about when you're putting a bike together or building a bike or designing stuff in that, you know, there's several things: utility, traversing, climbing, aerodynamics, power, fun, descending, tricks, comfort. And like in this case one might be an XC racer where they're over here and they're trying to narrow down in these areas for optimizing in these conditions. And case two is a descending, they're over here. But it might be within your capacity making decisions that if you're not racing, if you don't have to worry about the title or getting points in that championship series, you could actually put together a bike that does this and covers a lot more space. You're a lot more comfortable. You have a lot more utility or fun on the bike versus trying to get that little bit extra on these sides for one little place. You could have a bike that's more fun, more places, more of the time. And that's a decision you have to make. Certainly people on the bleeding edge of racing, they're going to look for more optimization all the time within one little area. And that, that's fine. You just make those decisions. I'm just trying to show graphically that it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. And you can actually make a bigger area sometimes if you don't have to optimize just in one parameter. And this is, of course, the diminishing returns map, kind of where we get our 80-20 rule. Like if we look at our results up to 100 and our effort up to 100, if you're looking for 100% results or, excuse me, 100% effort over here on this blue chart, to get up to 100% effort, well, you're going to be putting in 100% effort, but look at this point of diminishing returns that we always talk about. To get that last 30% over here, or we say 20% sometimes, and this is just a theoretical graph. It's not a real thing. Anyway, but you can have an easier time getting into here than you can into here, and it might cost you a huge amount of money replacing every single part on your bike with carbon or titanium, or training every single day, or eating from a blender, or whatever you have to do to get to that point. It's so hard, but it's not too hard to get here. But I see a lot of people down here because they're not really thinking about it. How do I get rid of that other thing? Gee whiz. Okay, anyway, do folks get that concept? And these are decisions that the tuner or the fitter or the I say tuner, we don't have tuners in bicycling, but we should. In motorsport, we have tuners. Like when I work in professional motorcycle racing, you have a tuner, and that's the person that you go to help you make these decisions for where you're going to go, because these are hard skills to learn how to tune and do all that stuff. Just reading magazines is definitely not going to do it. So how do we do all this? How do we do that? Well, as I showed earlier, we're going to make a print. You have to have a print. If you're a competitive racer, you have to have a print. If you're a frame builder, you have to have a print. If you're a customer getting a custom bike built, you have to have a print. You have to have a print if you're going to do any of this stuff, because what your goal really is to have a development program, okay? And what that is wherever you want to start, you can start today, draw your bike, make a print. Okay, day one, development program. From now on, you track every decision and you write everything down. And you update your print as you change parts, and preferably, you're going to evaluate what this new configuration does better than before or worse than before, and you can start make expected changes for the future that will maybe get you through it. So in fact, you don't suffer from making a change. It's better here and 2 other places, not better here and worse at 3 other places, okay? We use CAD to do this generally. You can use a sheet of graph paper if you want, or note paper. I mean, if folks have seen my work, they've seen my Microsoft Excel calculations that take up pages where I numerically configure all this stuff. But I would say just basic CAD. We're lucky because Brent makes Bike CAD, and if you don't have a copy of Bike CAD and you're interested in this stuff, it's one of the best decisions you can make. It's one of the best decisions if you're a competitive rider, or you're really paying attention to your riding, like you go on super adventures, and you care for your equipment, because we're an equipment-based sport. Getting on Bike CAD and getting used to documenting your setup is going to do you the greatest favor, and it's going to help you understand far more. You got to write things down and record them, and go into significant amounts of detail. And we're going to get into pretty pictures soon. Don't worry. Okay. Also, you can practice. There's your bike, there's the bike you like to ride and the bike you want or dream of or whatever, but then you can do your friend's bike or your wife's bike or your husband's bike, or some doobie that's got a problem, or they're a racer and you kind of go, hey, I'd love to draw your bike or something like that. Draw their bike. And what that does is it gives you time to think outside of your box. This gentleman here does bike fitting for people and ordering custom bikes. And his job is to think for somebody else and think and understand what they need and communicate that well to other builders. And that's really good. And I think more people can learn more if they do that and help the people around them with fits, or just documenting the setup, or saying, oh, you're going to buy a bike, you're going to spend $10,000 and throw all the money at it. You should at least think about how it's going to fit before you buy it rather than after you buy it. Especially because, one thing we'll talk about in about a second is geometry charts that are provided by manufacturers like Specialized or Trek or anything like that. And you learn to read those. Sometimes I bag on a bike online. I say, that bike sucks. People are like, how do you know? You haven't ridden it yet. It's like, I read the box score, bro. It's like a piece of junk, And it's like, because I'm reading those and I'm like, oh my gosh, that bike's terrible, and I can tell. And that's something you can easily develop if you practice this enough. But one thing you'll also find out when you do that is all these manufacturers, well, not all of them, but very often they're lying or misrepresenting their product or making numbers up. That's common. It happens. I'll prove it. Okay. When you're doing your testing, you want to do it actual riding. If you're like in mountain bike land like I am, you can't evaluate a mountain bike by taking it for a spin in the parking lot. It's not possible. You're not on the ground conditions, you're not on a trail, you're not hitting bumps or anything like that. The tires literally are interacting in a whole different way than they will when you're using the bike. So when you're testing, you do have to be in actual riding conditions for the bike. If it's a road bike, you need to be on that monster climb that hurts real bad, or get 40 miles under your belt to really feel it. We learn to write about this stuff. I like words, they're superpowers. You keep your records current. Also, if you have somebody you're working with, like if you're working with a local racer, that's not one of the nicest ways to work if you have a racer, because they're really invested in getting better, and they want to hear the magic. What should I change to go faster and all that stuff? Well, you need to translate how they're talking. One of the things a tuner learns to do skill-wise is listen to the rider and evaluate what they're saying, because what they say the cause for the problem isn't necessarily the cause. They have assumed, and they might have a confirmation bias or a sunk cost bias. So if you know anybody that's bought a $14,000 bike, it's amazing. It's the best bike in the whole world. And honestly, it might be the best bike they've ever ridden. But the thing is like, if you spent $14,000 on a bike, it had better be the best bike in the world. And if it isn't, you're going to somehow convince yourself that it is. So when you talk to somebody in these positions, or like sponsored riders, it's like, the fork I got for free works so good. It's like, well, yeah, it was free, and you're really stoked, and you want them to give you another free one. That you have a motivation for making up a story in your mind about how baller the free junk is, and that these are all things that you kind of have to start interpreting, type of thing. I think it's after this page we'll have pictures. Cool. Peer review of prints is awesome. If you make a print, share it with a friend that might be into this stuff. Say, look, I made this print. What do you think about this geometry? Bag on it. Give me hell. Critique me. And you can do that online nowadays. You can share it by email to somebody that lives across the world that's into it. So peer review can be really good, and you want to be challenged. You want somebody that's going to call you out on something like, that's pretty good, but boy, this is stinky over here. I've done a lot of development in a full rigid bike, both on mountain bike and all-road type situations. And what's really cool about developing in a full rigid context is there's nowhere to hide. Full suspension bikes are very difficult to learn from because there's a lot that clouds the feedback. The whole system is designed to mellow everything out. In a full rigid bike, if the steering doesn't work or the fundamental geometry doesn't work, you'll know right away. And you can't hide from that. And it's really good. And if you get into frame building and you can just make a couple different frames for fun and just try some different geometry, do it in a full rigid sense. You can make a custom fork with any offset you want. You don't have to stick to traditional or commercially available measures. You can just go completely off the ranch and make it the way you want. And then we have angle adjustable headsets Now, there's not a lot you can adjust with that. You're basically cocking the fork in the head tube at a different angle. But it's nice, and I've done some work with those before I got into the range where I really knew where I was going with stuff. And then also, just like how does the novice get started? They get started, write a shoddy first draft. Like, okay, I'm going to make a print. I don't know how to make a print. It's going to turn out like garbage. Great, make it. That's awesome. Start, just write a shoddy first draft. You can make it better. I'm not the best writer. I'm the best rewriter. That's what you want to be. So you just get started. Just get started. Start doing it. Use BikeCAD free or BikeCAD online, or if you have a CAD package available, if you're a student, you can download Autodesk product and use that, whatever you want to do. But you get started, and you do real geometry, not Bike Magazine junk. Bike magazines have no idea what they're talking about at all. Okay. I'm going to start with this example just because I felt like it was a good way into all this. Okay, we just bought a bicycle for my wife. My wife, Wendy, is 5'6" tall. This is the Specialized Stump Jumper, their flagship mountain bike. Which size should I get her? Does anyone know? Who doesn't already know? Any ideas?
It should be the S3.
It should be the S3 or the S2, I think, right? You think one of those two? S3 or S2?
Depends on what your salesman says.
Right. It depends on what salesman you've got. You know, maybe the little lady's going to want an S2, or she looks hardcore. Maybe she needs to get her an S3 or whatever. Okay. Here's their geometry for that bike. We've got a lot of numbers over here, and they relate to this. Now, Specialized, I mean, we're going to beat up on them right now, but they're not an exception, and they're not the worst when it comes to this. They just happen to be the one I'm most familiar with currently. Okay, so they have an S sizing scheme, which I actually think is a very good direction for things to move in, and various numbers here relating to stuff. Who's familiar with looking at charts like this? Okay, who looks at this chart and goes, I have no idea what you're talking about? Excellent, okay. Cool, well maybe I think after today you might have a little bit of a start. Okay, so we have stack, reach, head tube length, head tube angle, all these numbers. It's like, I don't even want to bother you with that right now. They're self-explanatory in terms of the graph, but there are problems here, and we're going to talk about the problems. Okay, just to answer the question earlier, what size did we get, Wendy, the S2 or the S3? We got her the S4, okay? And we got her the S4 because I had drawn these bikes up before buying the bike. I knew what handlebars I had available, what stems I had available, and what the seat posts were and everything like that. And on a wing and a prayer, I said, we're going to get an S4, and we're not even going to stand you over the bike. We're going to walk out of the shop with the S4 having never even put her butt on that seat, okay? This is a drawing of the S4, okay? Now, from that drawing, we've got these red values. And anybody familiar with BikeCAD? These making value colorations is something that you'll be able to do in 18.5. It's about to be released, which is a very nice thing for communication, I think. And also, it wasn't ready by the time I made this. We were doing some prototype work in 18.5. But you'll be able to have a description under there of anything, like if you're a bike maker. Or are you from 22? Yep. Okay, so if you're sending this to a client, you could write under that 603, like, we decided to make this longer, or whatever. And you could add a note, and you could really communicate using different colors what different things mean. So if we go back and we look at S3, we're going to look at this row, I'm sorry, S4, we're going to look at this row here at these values. And most of them like 333 millimeters of bottom bracket height, head tube angle 65. You know, some are common throughout the range and some are very specific. And you can see from there and the rest of the literature, we can figure out, well, we know there's 622 millimeter bead seat diameters on the rims. We know the fork length they're using and the fork travel. We know the offset and the head angle and front center, things like that. But that really left us in a bit of a bind, because realistically, while they communicate to us, and I'm sorry, not N, but D, is it O or D? Oh, there, O, 76-degree seat tube angle. Well, what does that mean? I don't know what they really mean by this seat tube angle. Did they make it up? Is effective seat tube angle, is that what they mean? Because it doesn't look like it's drawn there. They're giving me an effective seat tube angle, not an actual seat tube angle. And if they gave us the actual seat tube angle, we'd need to know the offset from the bottom bracket as well. But we don't have either of those information. We've just got some theoretical 76 degrees for every bike in the range. That sounds fishy. If we look at 76 degrees right here, these purple values are the values in question, okay? I made them to stand out because we're going to be talking about these purple values in terms of they lie to us, okay? 76 degrees, if we extend it up the line, is a point coming from the seat tube where it would actually intersect the actual seat tube at 791 millimeters from the bottom bracket height. Guess what my seat height is? Got a good guess?
76?
No, 745. Okay? My seat height is 745 millimeters. Every one of these bikes, it says, is 76 degrees. Now, these are for big and small riders. And it might change with other variables, but the thing is that if every one of these bikes is describing the seat for 791, I couldn't even get on that bike. And that's the seat tube angle that they're claiming. Okay, now we're just going to go to another parameter just to kind of close in on this, and we'll look at, okay, you're a fitter, and you know your bike, so you're going to go look at the effective top tube length. Great, that's awesome. No, it's not. We don't use that. In the real world, top tube length, effective top tube length, and stack and reach are not values you should ever be discussing when talking about bike fit or geometry. They're valueless. But it's part of the information that they give us. So let's look at that. Let's look at, where is it? Top tube length horizontal, 633 millimeters. Now, there's two ways of doing top tube length classically. There's the Taiwanese way, which is center of the top of the head tube horizontally across to the seat tube, or there's the contact of the top tube intersection with the head tube across. Okay, so it looks here like they're doing it the Taiwanese way, which is fine. Oh no, sorry. It looks here like they're going with the center of the top tube. If we look there, see this is the reach, and that's the effective top tube length, but it's not intersecting the top there. Okay, so they're doing it that method. Now, 633, I drew it in here because I had to measure that our offset here was 110, and in fact, all of the seat tubes are 68 degrees in reality. So it's an actual 68 and an actual 110, and so I could build that into my model. 633, that's great. Where's the point of intersection with the head tube axis? It's 385 millimeters below the head tube. It's essentially right about where my rim is. Now, is that a useful parameter? It's not even close to up there. That's where it should be, but in fact, it's right there. You know what's funny? In all the research I did on this bike, no one mentioned anywhere that that number is totally erroneous and doesn't reflect anything meaningful on the bike. Isn't that funny that nobody noticed? How many millions of these have they sold, do you think? A lot. Not one person anywhere has ever mentioned that. Okay, let's just take a look. If we were going to do it the Taiwanese method, it would be about 612. Now, if you're a fussy bike person and someone says, well, I wanted it 633. That's what I thought I was buying, but if you're going to sell me a 612, I don't want that, right? Because that's a big enough difference. 15 millimeters on the length of something. I mean, we know fussy types. They're gonna be like, no way, I'm 56 square, bro, or whatever. So we've got a problem in that these numbers aren't even close to each other. And in fact, if we want to go even deeper down this wormhole, earlier when we talked about 76 degrees and 791 height, if we were to do the intersection there to there, where the head tube would intersect, that would be 603 millimeters. So that 633 value is completely a joke, okay? Now, I drew this bike with the seat post that is supplied by Specialized, inserted the maximum value that it's able to be inserted, and they were nice about doing that. They said, where is it, maximum seat post max insertion. That's really good information. We'll talk more about seat posts. But that they supplied that, that's excellent. That they gave us the front center information, that's awesome. They should be encouraged for doing that. Most manufacturers don't, but they did, and that's great. But the thing is, they're giving us completely imaginary seat tube angles and top tube lengths for this bike. That's not cool. And nobody at Specialized figured that out? That's kind of weird too, isn't it? It's starting to sound like people that work at bike marketing divisions of companies actually don't know much about bikes. Might be true, right? So, but we've got our front center, that's the bottom bracket to front wheel, and that's actually the important value on a bike, okay? We're gonna talk more about that stuff. I should probably save that. But anyway, I just wanted to show you, I can take values that are given from literature, put them into BikeCAD. I can build a bike around it, and I'll smell a rat real quick, In fact, I was gonna say, this seat tube height, I think we experimentally decided that on that one, it's 77.8 degree seat tube angle. Now, what's even crazier, in the current mountain bike market, all the kids chatting on Pink Bike, they see that number, 76 degree seat tube, and they say, no way, I'm not riding an old man mountain bike. That's some old time stuff. I want something dope, right? If you put that number there, 77.8, they'd be like, that's the bike I want. That bike's hot. That bike's now, right? They actually could have put that number there, and it would have been true, and they would have sold more, right? But they put that number there that's entirely fictitious, and they're going to sell less bikes for it. Isn't that crazy? That's how you need to be, is I smell a rat and get to the bottom of it. Anyone have any questions about this? Oh, one thing is, they didn't tell me that they designed the geometry around 64 millimeter tires because they gave me the bottom bracket height and the drop and the chainstay length or whatever. I could calculate, because I knew the rim size diameter, what the height of the tire was. And so I build that into my thing, even though they didn't come out and say it. So you always want to do that if you're reverse engineering a geometry from their chart. They generally don't say, the geometry for this was designed for this size tire or something like that. They won't do that. Most don't even tell you what fork length they are. Here's another thing. Specialized is not exceptionally bad. They're actually fairly good. And one of the things they've done well here is they've told you what the fork length and offset is here. That's really cool. A lot of geometry prints don't tell you that information, what the designed front end stuff is. So we want to get that information, and Specialized has tried here. The problem is it seems that the people that work in their marketing department or their communications department don't have a lot of experience with bicycle chassis. And if you don't have a lot of experience with bicycle chassis, maybe doing marketing work for Specialized isn't the greatest place for you, right? Okay, anybody have any questions about this drawing of the Specialized stump jumper?
Yeah, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but what's the context to suspension segment?
What's that?
As far as like the bottom bracket height measurement, what's that in context to as far as like suspension?
Okay. Generally, when you are reading geometry information for a full suspension bike, you're getting information for a topped out condition bike. So the bike is topped out, not sagged, is generally how it is done. There may be exceptions.
Yeah, I've seen both.
You have to keep your hackles up for that one. You don't know it till you know it, what they're doing. So you start filling in numbers, and if it starts not making sense, you start pushing even harder. These light blue numbers are values that I had to figure out, type of thing. I had to figure out that their drawing actually had a 1 millimeter lower headset stack, right? They didn't tell me that, but by filling things in, by using my knowledge and noticing, I go, okay, this is a 1 millimeter lower headset. I measured my wife's bike. It had a 3 millimeter top cap, which could be changed out. That's an easy thing to change. And the distance from the rear axle to the seat tube was 493 approximately. If I'm off a millimeter or whatever like that, it'll affect this offset. But it seemed like, they have a nice round number for their actual seat tube. When I actually measure it, it's, 3 degrees different than the head tube angle. That's a nice way to do it. You can measure the seat tube, measure the head tube, measure the angular differences, and use that rather than their published utter BS information. I mean, most mountain bikes that have full suspension will have a bent seat tube, but for some reason they're not giving you the offset of that seat tube. Well, that's insane. Some are starting to do it now, but most don't. And that's really problematic because supposedly, according to fit guys and trainers and stuff, it actually matters where your saddle is. We live in a world where everybody claims to be really up on their stuff and really fussy about their saddle position, but for some reason it hasn't bothered them the least that they're not getting any information that would make it easy for them to predict where their saddle will end up from the manufacturers that are making the $12,000 bike they're going to buy. Are you crazy? That's a tough thing to kind of just skip over, since that's one of the main things we're going to be doing, right? Okay, any other questions about this one? Because it's going to get harder from here. Okay.
Quickly run through where that 633 comes in again?
633, okay. Yeah, so right over here, they say top tube length horizontal. And that's the non-Taiwanese method for measuring top tube length, where the top tube intersects the head tube, laid over from bad old days of horizontal top tubes and things like that. So right about there. And they give us a value of 633. Yep. Okay, so I drew where along the head tube axis that intersection point is. And if you, there it is. Where along the head tube that, and you see, right there. Right there's the intersection. So we came down from the top of the head tube, 385 millimeters, and it's at that point that, and there's an extension line up to there because it's dropped down a little bit. It's kind of, we got a cloudy print here. But to right there is 633 millimeters. That's the information they gave us,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
So their top tube intersection information that they're communicating to the customers for the $10,000 build is at a point right about where my ERD is. Or my, sorry, actually not. Yeah, my ERD, not even my bead seat, right? So it's like, that's insane. You would have thought that I wouldn't be the first person to point that out, but I am. And this is not on an obscure bike. It's a specialized stump jumper. It's actually a really awesome bike. I think it's a great bike. We bought it for my wife. I'm stoked on it. Anyway, any more questions? Okay. So this is the same frame, but what we've done is we've changed the fork. That came with a 140 fork. I happen to have a 150 fork laying around, so I swapped in the longer fork, and if you noticed, it changed the head tube angle by half a degree. It changed the seat tube angle by half a degree. Actually, on this print, now that I've added the saddle at the correct height and everything like that, this is the true effective seat tube angle on the bike. and for some reason I don't have the actual drawn, but it would have changed, it would have gotten half a degree slacker, just like the head tube, because they rock the same. Okay, and I've got a 185 dropper. We put in a longer dropper because, I mean, I'm running a 240 dropper for mountain biking. She's got a 185. She's a little bit smaller than me. Probably want her more on a 200, but this is the max we could fit in there. And I've changed the stem, is like a Syntace saber tooth or flat forest 55. And I've got a SQ Labs 12 degree back sweep bar that moves from the binder to the hand grip is 62 millimeters that way and 4 millimeters that way. We'll get more into that. What I wanted to show you, this is another comparison. We're going to look at another one where we change the bars. So this is our initial setup of the bike, and she's riding around with this for a while. And if you notice in these yellow, these are a lot of the measurements that surround the hand grips. So when we're on a flat bar bike, I mean, all of this changes for drop bar bikes as variants, and I would love to see people that work with drop bar bikes more put some work into this because there's a lot of need in that realm. But for flat bar bikes, I've done most of the work already. But all these yellow dimensions are describing something about that hand grip area. That's what we care about right there, the end of the grip. Now, theoretically, it would be better to be referencing a point maybe 2.5 inches in from the end of the grip, more reflective of what the hand is doing. But in practice and for expediency, using the end of the grip is actually just easier. It works well enough. That's kind of what we're doing. It also works well with bike CAD because otherwise it would just turn into lunacy trying to predict that in 3D space and everything like that. So we use the end of the handlebar grip to measure, and these are the associated positions with that. And here you can see, let's use the value of right here. This is what we call the PVD rad thing. It's kind of a thing we discuss at length in another venue. But 821 millimeters from the bottom bracket to the center of the end of the grip at a 55.4 degree angle. Now, when we talk about performance fit or what you're trying to get out of your flat bar bike, that's really the operative number right there. That's telling us basically everything we want to know about the flat bar positioning. Now, we could use the XY values, the Y being 676 and the X value being, I think it's this 466 value here. It would have been nice if I could have written this stuff underneath like I wanted to, but we didn't get that ready in time. Anyway, we could use the XY, and that's fine. But the thing is, this is a radial measurement, kind of like how we're used to talking about the seat position at a distance and an angle. Hand grips work the same way. I mean, this is a radius around the pedals that we're working in. The bike doesn't care about the attitude of the bike, or you generally don't notice the attitude of the bike, but the thing is you'll notice the radial position because you're coming off your feet to your hands. Where level to earth is doesn't really matter. If you've read Myth of Cops by Bontrager, that he talks a lot about that, but we're extending that to entirely new directions. Anyway, so that's the bike as configured, as it really rides with different tire. Oh, we've still got those tire values, just that left it consistent within that scheme. But we're going to change these values here because we're going to change the bars. So 12 degrees, 9 degree bars are sort of the commodity flat handlebars. And they're really great if you're doing bench presses. And they're kind of maybe left over from a bend when we had hand grips that were like this. 9 degree work well, but we've moved out to here. And now 9 degree can actually be very painful if you're not fully like pro enduro or downhill racing and you have to do a bench press like that. When we're doing general riding or something like that, I'm finding I'm using a 14 degree and I might want to go to a 16 degree or something like that. It's really nice, really comfortable. You don't know, you get a lot more relaxed hand position. I think a lot of people like get into like drop bars because there's more hand positions because their hands hurt on flat bars. It's like, you might be that you were trying a flat bar with like a 6-degree bend or a 9-degree bend and it just didn't work for you because it's like, you don't work that way. Try a 16-degree bend. And you might find that flat bars are better because it's much more control. Anyway, let's go to it. Okay, so we changed the bars. We moved from the 12 to the 16, and you notice these two values change right here. That's from the binder of the 55. And granted, a Synthase saber-tooth stem goes down to 44, and you might think you're outsmarting the system by setting up for a 44. I would suggest you don't. It's a beautiful stem and a real problem solver in a lot of environments, but the 44 kind of gets bound up, especially on carbon frames around the head tube area, and give yourself a little breathing room with the 55 is a favor you'll be doing to yourself. So that's why the 55 stayed 55, didn't go down to 44, is because it's just, you use that in emergencies. Like, if you're going to plan on it, use the 55.
You're not running any spaces, are you?
What's that?
You're not running any spaces, are you?
On this situation, no, because again, we spec'd the S4 for somebody that otherwise would have been spec'd for the S3, and we've increased the fork length. So by using, if anyone do you folks know the flat forest stem? It's incredible stem, and you know it gets us down and dirty, and that's good. So we're trying to build this value up a bit, kind of get it so she's really engaging her body when she climbs and rides. And what's nice about a modern mountain bike setup is by moving the front wheel out so far ahead, and we're going to get into this in a second, we can run fairly aggressive, what we call cross-country riding positions that really engage the riding and the muscles. And when you point downhill, you're not going to crash over the handlebars and die. So you actually get much better climbing on the enduro long front ends than you could otherwise attain with the short ones, because you can ride a position that you can engage the bike muscularly better and not die when you go down the trail on the downside. That's awesome, right? We've been talking about this for years. This is forward geometry 101. And I can talk at length about that. This is, again, remember I talked about this spiraling cognition, where you got to learn some of this stuff before you can come back, and then we can start over again. So I'm trying to like do 8 spirals with you all at once right here. So this is a difficult subject that I would much rather spend a semester talking about at a university. Okay, so we can see that between these two bikes, when I change the handlebars, all of these yellow values change. I changed one thing. I changed the handlebars. All of those values change. The riding the grip position. Remember, on mountain bikes, the saddle position generally doesn't matter other than sitting going up the hill. Once you start pointing downhill, the saddle's just out of the way. So we're most concerned about where the hand grips are. But if you notice, 56.5 degree angle from 55.4, by going to that different handlebar, we've actually gotten her a little bit more upright on the bike. I was worried she was a little bit too forward and down on the bike, and I wanted to move her back. I painted myself in a corner by shoehorning her into this big bike for performance reasons. I wanted her in here. Like, I ride an 850 front center. I'm 5'10". And if you were just doing a straight up proportional math across that for 5'6", it comes out to 800 millimeters. So when I'm talking about what works good for me, if we're just being fast and loose, 850 for me, 800 for her. That's one of the things we wanted with this bike. We wanted to get her a dope bike, not some piece of junk some 14-year-old sold us off the floor, right? So we were a little aggressive with that first handlebar, and by going to the 16 degree, we actually got her a little bit more upright, a little bit more comfortable, and it's going to be a little nicer and relaxed on traverses, and it's also going to feel a little bit better going downhill. Isn't that cool? Just by changing one part. And that was a predictive change. I knew it was going to be further back. Granted, handlebar manufacturers know far less about bicycles, I think, than almost any other manufacturer. If you look at the way they describe the geometry of their handlebars, it absolutely makes sense, no sense, is nonsense, and doesn't tell you anything about the handlebars. It's really bad. Anytime anyone says upsweep, you know they don't know anything about handlebars. Absolutely. It's a zero value term that means they don't know what they're talking about. That's what upsweep means. So I'm giving you the X and the Y, how high off that is, how much further back, then we can get into 3D stuff. We're going to talk more about that, okay? Anyone have any questions about this example that we just had with the stump jumper? Because we're going to move on. It's going to get a little bit more nebulous now.
I can just say that, like, on the size cycle, I changed to a 7-centimeter reach bar, and you talk about truths. All of a sudden, my designs were 2 centimeters off. When I was seeing the end results, it was like the geometry was 2 centimeters off. And so their reach that they were saying was off.
Yeah.
2 centimeters.
Yeah, I don't even touch handlebars until I don't put them on a bike until I've validated what the measures are. And I bought a Surly handlebar 17 because the SQs are German. You know, Syntace and SQ are German companies, and generally German companies are doing all right. And they're better than others in terms of how they do stuff. Of course, you're paying a premium, but I wanted to get the Surly bar because it's like, it's a US distribution. Of course, it's Taiwanese made. It's a lot cheaper, but you know, it's like, I mean, love them or hate them. I mean, they're an American branding company versus a German branding company. Might as well do that. And it was a 17 sweep. And the bar came in and it was like so utterly useless it never went on a bike. I have to sell it the minute I get it. Because it was like, oh, this is garbage. And it's just like, what are you thinking? Versus the SQ, there's no reason or anything that the price or manufacturing is any different or harder. It's just they made a bar that's awesome in modern bike setup, and the Surly made a bike that's garbage in modern bike setup, right? Now, if you're gonna put down $70, put it down on something awesome rather than garbage, okay? Okay, so let's talk. Here we go. We're gonna go back into the rat's nest. So that was our easing in, okay? So this is one of my bikes. This is the Fighting Falcon, okay? Now, I've broken up into colors, unlike before when I just gave you that sea of stuff to get lost in. And I've given you a little legend up here. Hopefully BikeCat will have the legend up by the time 18.5 is released. I had to bring it in from Illustrator. But we have some color values here. And you can see yellow's the rider fit. The red's the handling values that you're going to want to look at. And then we have COM, okay? Now this is crucial. Now there's a lot of stuff that's been happening in talking about bike geometry, but what we haven't been talking about in large part is the center of mass of the system. And you can say, oh, I'm trying to get a lower center of gravity on my bike, or I'm trying to put more weight on my front tires. Well, that was a roundabout way of talking about center of mass and where that is. If we're talking about a human, generally, center of mass is approximately your belly button. Sure, plus or minus a couple centimeters. Your center of mass is here. If you got thrust into a zero-G environment and you were spinning out of control, you'd be spinning about a point right about here. And that's why we call it the center of mass. Because if you add up and do an integration or whatever, is that right? Integral. Yes. You'd find that that's where everything centers on. And that's the point it spins about in space. Okay. So I've done some calculations of the center of mass for myself on this bike, the bike itself, and the combined system. Okay. In this case, unlike, here we're going to go all the way back. Where is it? Just because I want to be clear, I show a center of mass right up there, okay, and the combined right here. That's the center of mass for me sitting on the bike and pedaling. But we're going to go over here, just because I don't want people to call me out on it later on. Why does it look a little different? Well, because now I've drawn the center of mass with me standing on the bike. And not just standing, I'm in my attack position. And if you know anything about riding downhill, or if you've done a lot of downhill riding and you've learned how to stand on a bike, the appropriate, generally, for just riding along is you with a slight crouch and a slight bend in your arms, and you could almost take your hands off the bars. You're balanced over your pedals, right? That's how you should be riding down the gnarliest single track you can imagine. Going down the hill, and you're going into the worst hellhole you can imagine, you should be standing on your pedals. That's where that expression comes from. Stand on your pedals. You don't lean on your handlebars. That is death when you do that, right? So I'm standing on the bike. And actually, this upper one is my body, and this is the combined system. Wait, did I screw that up on this drawing? It's supposed to be, these angles are supposed to be going. It looks like I screwed up this print. I apologize. It's supposed to be going to this lower one, because this lower one is the body and the bike added together produce that. And the thing is, the bike doesn't care that it's my body, or the contact patch doesn't care that it's where my body is. It cares about where the entire system is. The bike is part of that. And yes, I move all over the place. And that's what makes this measurement very hard, because the body, even when we try in this laboratory condition, I had to have a buddy take a picture of me, and then we had to tilt the bike to do the measurement, and then he's kind of telling me to move forward or move back, so I'm duplicating exactly the same position, because getting center of mass heights is very challenging. It's easy to get it distributed x-wise, but on the y, it's really challenging, and we'll go over that in a second. Anyway, I just wanted to show you, when you're riding your bike down that hill, what's really going on here is this is your angle of your mass to your contact patch. Let's just assume these numbers are good and they go to the combined system. That 51.9 degree there, that's from where the tire contacts to the center of mass. That's what's really being translated into the front end. The head angle doesn't matter in this description right now. Head angle doesn't matter. When you're climbing up a hill, let's imagine these numbers were for me in the saddle sitting down. It doesn't matter what your seat post angle is. It matters what your angle is from the center of mass to the rear contact patch. In this case, it's 67.8. And when you get to that tip point where you wheelie out is when you've exceeded that. So when we talk about seat tube angle or saddle, that kind of stuff, whatever's placing this saddle over the bottom bracket, there are performance advantages in terms of how you're interacting with the handlebars, of course, and the biomechanics of that. But what is going to affect your traction or weight on the tires is the center of mass over to here and how that gets distributed as you change attitude over the surface. And if you climb and you exceed these angles, you're running into near zero weight over the front end, okay? And that's something we're going to start talking more about in the future, is these center of mass values and how they really work with a person really on the bike. Because that's really what tells us how that, because none of this matters. Like I said earlier, top tube length doesn't matter. It doesn't. Doesn't mean anything, top tube length. Your chainstay angle doesn't mean anything. Your seat stay angle. Now there are, of course, construction details that lead to different flex characteristics and the thing like that. But from a geometry point of view, that stuff doesn't matter. What matters is that flop dimension is the amount the head tube raises and lowers as you turn the handlebars, right? That's that feeling that you get where it's like, oh, it just wants to go, like that. Well, that's because the head tube wants to drop down to its lowest potential, right? Well, that's that measurement here, and you can imagine an arc that it's going to pass over, and if that arc is huge and has big drops on the side, that's going to translate into that feeling, right? So we're starting to look at these values here and where centers of mass are in our contact patch. Okay, we're going to discuss this a bit more. I need to talk about a few issues before we start going down a cool rabbit hole that I designed. So what I just described there in long form, looking at that's this. When you look at a bike, this is the bike. All this stuff doesn't mean anything. That doesn't matter. This is the bike. And you can imagine, if you close your eyes and imagine you're sitting on a bike and turning the handlebars, isn't that what you're on? Doesn't that explain that feeling? Front wheel trail is the length of the lever that the head axis is acting through to the contact patch. The rear wheel trail connects the head tube axis to the rear contact patch. Now we talk about how does you folks have heard about caster and the caster effect and the self-centering nature of a bike. This is what we're looking at when we're talking about caster. The contact patch creates, from the friction of the tire and the surface it's on, creates a certain amount of force, let's call it, right? It's a frictional force that it's acting in a way against the bike, right? I'm drawing a blank on all the correct words, but it's friction that's at the heart of this. On a frictionless surface, your bike doesn't work. If you're going along a lake bed, you do not, well, I mean, there's some friction on a lake bed, not lake bed, frozen ice. There is some friction there, especially with soft rubber and maybe spikes or whatever. But if you had a purely frictionless surface, a bicycle doesn't work. I mean, of course, it's just going to fall down. Four-wheel vehicle will at least stay up, right? But the thing is, it's like that friction there is acting on that lever. That lever is connected to your head tube axis. When you're going in this direction forward, this friction wants to fall into its least potential. I think it's least potential there, but it's going to fall back here and create this drag on that lever. And when we talk about longer trail bikes being more stable, well, if you have, let's just invent a number, 10 newtons of force is acting here. Well, if you double the length of that lever, that's magnified twice as much, right? You have twice as long of a lever acting on the system. That's considerably more than it was before. And when we change our front wheel trail values to do that, it's great. One of the problems that we have is that changing front wheel trail doesn't happen independently. We tend to change flop at the same time. And we're having a little battle up there in terms of how do we want it to feel, how do we want the system to perform, but we want to, yeah, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul a lot of times. It's just that. And anyway, but here's the center of mass, and the center of mass is acting into that system, and that's what you need to know about a bike in large part, right? When we get into fit and like how does my back feel or my butt feel after 100 miles, that's a little different. But from a chassis handling point of view, this is what we're talking about, okay? Anybody have any questions on that?
One question. So if you're wanting the framing of the angle from center of mass to be more isosceles, geometrically speaking, the way to come at that would be to add more chain stay.
You could, yeah, if you wanted something that was doing that, but again, earlier when we talked about geometry, we talked about knock-on effects. Okay, yeah, you could make it more stable in the rear, but you're going to change how much weight is getting distributed over each tire.
Right.
And if that's not what you want out of that, then that will cause effects in cornering situations. But in a straight line climb on a super steep surface, maybe that's advantageous if that's what you're after. And that's why we have to know this stuff, because it's like, oh, this has an effect later on. And what's interesting is I'm on a mountain bike with 410 millimeter chainstays. And granted, I don't go for it on every single climb, even the most brutal ones, but it's amazing how well that bike sticks. And the entire industry is telling me how awesome long chainstays are. And it's like, long chainstays are garbage. They're total garbage. They make it easier to make bikes with longer travel, because otherwise the tire hits the seat tube. And then you end up with problems with the seat tube. They're trying to sell a product saying long chainstays are rad just to make their job easier on assembly and manufacture of a bike, not because it'll make a better bike for you. And all the cool kids talking about it, and then it becomes true because you've said it enough times, right? But so I've been playing with these numbers and figuring out where and how to get traction in various different situations or better rollover effect. But yeah, you can change this. You can change any of this stuff any way you want. Will it be good? I don't know. Will it solve one problem and create 5 more? I don't know. It depends on what you're trying to do. But the thing is, if you know this, at least you're starting with some actual information, okay? So here's that bike again, and I'm just drawing. Okay, this one's better. I've actually, unlike that first one, I've actually drawn correctly to the right center of mass, because this one here is the combined of that and that. And I haven't given, where do I have that cough drop? Hold on. I screwed that up. Sorry, this cough is driving me crazy. Whoa. Okay. Yeah, so this is just like actually in real space. These are some new values that BikeCAD's going to be doing in 18.5, so that we can actually, you have to enter your center of mass values into BikeCAD. But the thing is, once you do, and you've kind of established a space for it, you can then, like this is the length of that line, that's the angle. I kept the angles to the seat and the handlebars. Now, this doesn't really matter. This is just a novelty right now because it's a new feature. I'm on another loop around that spiraling cognition thing where I'm trying to understand what this is all about, this angle to the seat to the contact patch. And it might be trivial. We come across things like that, but I'm on a loop, I'm on a loop on that because it's new information, new ways of looking at things. But on the front here with this, and the value here is 69.1 from the hand grip to there. Now, what I described earlier about when we're really rocking a bike, we're standing on the pedals and we don't have weight on the handlebars, that's great. Until you hit that absurd obstacle and you are just crashing down to earth. And if anyone's ridden truly aggressive mountain biking, they know what happens when you come in and you are just all on your handlebars just to save your life type of thing. And that's fun, But the thing is, there are moments where you're going to be piling onto that handlebar. And granted, your center of mass is going to probably move forward a bit. Remember, this is a highly theoretical situation. Just a little bit of movement will change the position of that. It's really tough. But the thing is, I'm trying to think a little bit more about this angle here from the grips to the ground, because there is a condition in mountain biking when you are all over your handlebars, and I want to think about that, okay? So I'm learning a bit, but I just wanted to show you, this is new BikeCAD stuff with the center of mass, and you'll be able to play with this once 18.5 comes out. When I talk about experimentally determining this stuff, and this is out of saddle, I have a whole nother sheet for in the saddle, because they are 2 different conditions. And it's pretty straight up database calculation, spreadsheet calculation. I'm only changing these gray values here, and it's returning all the rest. You can do it with a single scale under the rear tire. If you have bathroom scale's probably not the greatest, but I bought some scales off Amazon for like $18 that are awesome. They're so good. And all you need is one. You don't even need 2. I've done it with 2 scales before, when I posted about it a year or 2 ago. But I got them. I was looking at a different way of doing it, and this is the Casalter book, if anyone's reading motorcycle dynamics. Anybody that's really into this stuff, you got to read Full, you got to read Casalter. You don't have to read Casalter, but you should have a copy just so that you can see what real math looks like on these motorcycle dynamics questions. But Full is very, very, very good in terms of what you really need to know for basic cycle geometry type stuff. The bicycle industry has largely not done geometry before, but motorcycle people have actually done it. So you want to look at their work. You're not going to find it in a bike book. Okay? But one of the problems with center of mass, or what came up and why I wrote about it before, if any of you know full suspension bikes, people talk about anti-squat percent. And the thing is, it's like the only way you can produce anti-squat percent is to know where the center of mass is, right? Well, if you're a 6-foot rider and you weigh 260 pounds, getting on a bike that's designed a particular way compared to another rider that's 4'6" and weighs 100 pounds, that center of mass location for those two scenarios is completely different. How can you be giving me an anti-squat percent? I'm starting to think that anybody that's giving me anti-squat percent on a suspension bike doesn't know anything about suspension, because they would know, because they'd actually calculated center of mass, and from discussions I've had, almost every person I've discussed center of mass with anti-squat on full suspension bikes hasn't actually experimentally calculated that. They've just gotten a number handed down from somebody, which isn't a great way to do it. So for full suspension, I'd rather see anti-squat angle rather than percent, because at least then you're being honest and not throwing in some imaginary number, much like we saw with seat tube angles. Hell, if they can't even give us an actual seat tube angle on a bike or offset or know that, do you think they actually know anything about kinematic stuff like that, where they could at least be honest? Like giving us anti-squat percent? Like, talk about dishonest. Wow. Anyway, I'm just showing you, this is how it works. This is the math.
Hate to be rude, I have to just interrupt for, I'm sorry, just 'cause if anyone has a bike in the bike valet, I know those people are getting ready to go home, so
We'll be leaving in 13 minutes, so please get your bike by then or it won't be attended. Thank you.
We've planned on going long here. That's why we did the end of the day. And hopefully it'll be on YouTube fairly soon. So if you're missing out, hopefully you'll be able to catch more. Thank you for coming. Thank you. All right. Okay, anyway, so this is basically how to do it. But you will notice if you go through this that all it takes is for you to lean just a little differently and the numbers go way out of whack. So we can talk about centers of mass. We should be realistic about where they are, but it's a number that's in actual riding is moving all over the place. It's a very dynamic value. It could be anywhere depending on any condition, but we kind of choose a couple conditions just so we can at least model for a certain situation. I don't think head tube angle matters much. Okay, did this quick and dirty. This is certainly not the greatest example of this, but I take my current bike has a 67.3 degree head angle, and I modeled two separate situations. One where I use on both I use a 62 degree head angle, and on this one I've matched the mechanical trail value, and on this one I've matched the flop value for this initial configuration. And if you notice, and this is the vertical view, the contact patch angle of the front tire looking through 3D space over here, what is the resulting angle? And granted, we never steer a bicycle with the chassis vertical, right? But this is just showing the front wheel projecting from the center line of the bike. This is how much the contact patch deviates from the center line of the bike with the bike vertical, and this is the resulting contact patch angle. Granted, there's going to be squirm and all kinds of stuff like that any motorsport person knows. But if you look at the resulting steering angle, this is, and I'm steering at 10 degrees, which is an extreme turn on a bicycle. If I steer at a matching 10 degrees, I get 8.9 degrees of steer. We've changed the steer angle 0.3 degrees by changing the head tube angle over 5 degrees slacker. That's a ludicrous change in head angle, and the resulting steer is almost insignificant. In fact, to match the steer, we have to steer the handlebars 10.4 degrees instead of 10 degrees. Now, that's not a lot, okay? Now, I say trivial because yes, it does change things. Does it matter enough that we need to focus on it? I don't think so. Here, when we go back to fixing the flop, 10 degree terms, it actually results in another 8.9 degree steer on the ground. And granted, this is actually incorrect from a real chassis dynamics point of view, but we're just choosing a perspective just to look. But if you notice, it kicks out the wheel a little bit less than it did before. And here, to match the steer, we're steering another 10.4. Granted, it'll kick out different. So just looking at it from this perspective, maybe head tube angle isn't very important. Maybe that's not what's really changing. In fact, all this talk about slack head tube angles, maybe what they really mean is longer front center, because longer front centers actually matter. We know that already. And I can show that on the center of mass graph, how we change the angle of that thing for our approach angle on stuff. So, and our change of weight and everything like that. So now granted, I said earlier, I'm wrong about everything, prove me wrong. Go for it, guys. Internet, have at it. You know, show me head angle really matters like that, okay? But again, to show this and to change that angle, what I've done is I've actually dropped, it's actually the same bike, I'm just moving the position along the head tube here. I can't explain it right now. There's another one, stem length is trivial. Stem length simply doesn't matter on a bicycle. And you're gonna go, well, what are you talking about, you're crazy. This is if you're designing a bicycle with a particular stem in mind. You can choose any length you want. I mean, there's other parameters within the bike, but you don't have to worry about the stem length. It can be anything, as long as the parameters that you care about that really drive the situation are in place. I've actually done this in 3D space when people were talking about stem length is very important. And granted, you see me using crazy front ends. I'm not arguing that you shouldn't be trying different things, just that this is 120 millimeter stem length. This is all in 3D space. These are real numbers, really calculated. This is a 40 millimeter stem. 3 times longer stem. Both are at a 65-degree head angle, and both have the sweep angle at 20 degrees from horizon. Same handlebar itself, it's a 12 millimeter rise handlebar. Everything is the same from one to another, just the stem length has changed, okay? I move the handlebar 10 degrees of rotation, whereas I note it over here. Oh wait, where do I note it? It should, oh there it is, right there. 10 degrees of rotation around the steering axis, and we can see that for the 120 millimeter one, the total movement, looking from one side, is 66.7 degrees, 7 millimeters. On the 40 millimeter, it's 68 millimeters. We've added 80 millimeters to that stem length, and guess what? The ends of the handlebar are moving less on the long one than on the short one. Isn't that cool? How many other people have mentioned that? In all these years of short stems are rad. Here, I'm showing you the change in position. Now, this is looking directly from the right-hand side. This is the measurements. It was tougher for me to model. I had to invent a whole scenario here in 3D. But from point to point in 3D space, on the 120 millimeter one, it's moving 70.3 millimeters from that point to that point in 3D from one position to the other. On the 40 millimeter, it's 68.5. Now, when it comes to, and these are, here it is, 785 millimeter handlebars. These are not fantastical numbers. Check this out. The actual leverage that you have over the end of the grip in the longer stem scenario, you actually have more leverage on this longer one than on the shorter one. Now, if you read all the magazine articles about the superiority of shorter stems, it doesn't seem to conform with this. I would argue almost everything they've said. Now, of course, if you're on a bike that's in front of you and you change stems, you've just changed a ton of our other variables, just like we talked about before with my wife's bike, changing the stem. What does that do? Where does that move the center of mass? But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking actual stem. How does it change if you're designing a bike so that your handlebars are where you want your handlebars or your hand grips? Ahead of that, you can do anything you want as long as the rest of your geometry is doing what you want. It doesn't matter if you're using a 40 or a 120 bar. I would say it's trivial, between 70 and, what's that, like 1.8 millimeters? You guys think you can notice 1.8 millimeters when hauling ass down some rough single track? Or even on a pristine velodrome, do you think you're going to notice 1.8 millimeters difference of hand grip location? I mean, how much am I moving it right now? About 20 millimeters? You know? We need to get serious when we're making up all this BS that we read on those magazines. And we need to start pushing back. Because I didn't make these numbers up. These are the numbers it reported back to me. I'm using real parts. Is that cool? I think it's cool. I love this stuff. I love when I find out that the emperor wears no clothes. Also makes me sad. When we're designing a bike or we're planning out a bike, a lot of bike builders or frame designers or people that talk about bike or read geometry ignore the handlebar and stem. They completely ignore the handlebars and stem. And it's to their detriment because it's crucial in the design of a bike. Here I'm showing a 40 millimeter stem with flat race face flats, 185s or whatever, and race face 1 1/4. Same stem, and I've got it at a 65 degree head angle, very common head angle, 20 degree of sweep angle from horizon. And I'm showing the different positions that we end up in. I've highlighted these values here because for this stem and bar combination to match the exact same height, or close enough to it, we have to run a 33 millimeter spacer, and we'll do that. But this configuration here is, 18 millimeters further back from the center of the head tube there, right? We've made a very important choice just on choosing one handlebar versus another in terms of if we're trying to place the end of our handlebars very precisely, how does that affect our actual reach over the bike? This stuff's important, right? Look down here, we're going to match the offset. So it's offset the same. We have this 40 with flat bars versus the rise bars. To match the offset in terms of distance, say, from the bottom bracket, we have to run spacers under this, but to get it into that position. But look, that's 90 millimeters versus 52. That's almost, 38 millimeters difference in height just by making a small choice like that. So I would say if you're designing a bike in BikeCAD or even in your CAD, the dimensions of your stem and handlebar are truly important in your bike design. And that you really need to narrow that stuff down so at least if a change is going to take place later, it's far closer to actual conditions that you expect than just say, oh, I like a 480 millimeter reach. It's like, that's utterly meaningless. You're talking about the position here. When we talk about, when you read the headset and stack reach and all those numbers, I don't care where the upper headset is. Do you care? Do you think it matters where the upper headset is? How come that's what they keep telling me about? Yeah. They keep telling me about the upper headset stack. Have you ever been riding single track and gone, damn, I wish my headset stack was lower? No, I haven't either. Why do they keep telling me that it is? That it's important where my headset is? It's weird, isn't it? You'd almost think they don't know what they're talking about. You'd almost think that, But here's the thing, we're concerned about this. So it starts getting very important in our geometry choices what our stem and handlebars are. And you can choose whatever you want to get to the goal you want. These are just some ones that I thought would be common and easy to understand. But the thing is that it's crucial in your design. Just like it doesn't matter what your stem length is. I mean, it matters where your hand grips are. It doesn't matter what your stem length is. Granted, if you're using a very long stem, you're probably shortening your front center, and that's generally not very good unless you're going to be running pace lines or, carrying your bike up a stairs for or putting it in a train. Even on all-road bikes, they're far too short. Like, they're insanely short. They're basically just crit bikes with fat tires. It's just, no one's done the work, because anytime you go off-road, you need a dropper and long front center. Just start there. Dropper and front center. Anyway, seat tubes. So I talked earlier about that offset seat tube. When I'm designing, what time is it?
It's 6 now.
It's 6. I talked to Bina. She said we could run till 6:30.
Okay, I wasn't told that. I'm just told by the convention guy needs to get the projector, so that's what. But yeah, I'll text you.
If you could find out, just double check and then let me know. And if I have to, I'll quit. Thank you. Okay, let's go into this. When I'm designing a bent seat tube, and this is something you'll see in a lot of media where I call them fashion bends in seat tubes, because whoever's building the bike goes, oh, bent seat tubes, you need to have a bent seat tube on a bike. Well, there's a purpose for bending the seat tube. It's the same as having an offset seat post. We're just doing it on the other end. You were talking about offsetting your seat post. Well, in the world of dropper posts, we generally don't have the option for offsetting your seat post. They're generally all zero offsets. So what we end up doing is we offset at the bottom. Now, what was the whole reason for offsetting seat posts was to be able to run shorter chainstays or rear centers than we could before. And so we scoot the saddle back from where it would otherwise end up with the seat tube sticking up. And it gave us the tire clearance we want. Well, we're doing the same thing on a modern bike. Here we have our 622 bead seat diameter. We add our tire height, and we add a little bit of mud and flux, because tires bend around, rims bend around, mud takes up space, all that sort of stuff. And that gives us this critical value. Well, it gives us the actual clearance OD versus our tire OD. And then we get this critical value. That's the distance from the rear axle to the back side of the seat tube. Now, it generally is going to end up in this space for the maximum tire condition. Whatever maximum tire and mud flux area that you've calculated, it's going to be that. If you see a 2-inch gap there, that's a fashion bend. That doesn't make any sense at all. Why are you bending your seat tube far more than you need to bend it to produce this goofy gap that's going to make it really hard to get your saddle in a good position? And it's actually more expensive to offset it more. And then and we do this all the way at the bottom because we want to clear as much dropper post as we possibly can. Again, I'm running a 240 millimeter dropper. I've got just about 10 more millimeters to go at the bottom of this. And I've tried to, I'm basically going to be crashing into my down tube soon enough. My buddy made a bike where for his girlfriend, really short, petite woman, where he sent the seat post into the down tube and the routing exited under the down tube because he was trying to get every millimeter he could for a real dropper on this extremely petite bike, So anyway, to understand when we're talking about bent seat tubes, this is what we're talking about. You just need to bead seat diameter plus tire height plus mud flux that far from the rear axle. That's what it should be. And if it looks like it's sticking out here in space, that means it's a fashion bend, and that person had no idea why he or she was bending the seat tube. It should be as close as possible, because from a biomechanics point in general, we want this tube to be as steep as possible, but in an effective way. And if we come way out here just to slack it that way, if we change position slightly, what's the determination?
6:15 to the projector, but you can have the room until 6:30.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
All right, so there we go, the Word of God. Okay, let's see. So, because we're going to be designing around a dropper, and this is going to be true for any all-road bike or mountain bike, anything that goes in the dirt gets a dropper. And if you see an all-road bike that doesn't have the capacity for a real dropper, i.e. 31.6 pin diameter, at least 150, if it doesn't have a 150 drop, it's kind of a road bike. I would say a road bike would get a 125 dropper in the modern era. But if it's an all-road or mount, and if it's an all-road bike, you're talking at least 150. If it's a mountain bike, you're in the 200 range. For most people, if you're shorter, it might be more. I mean less, I'm sorry. But the thing is, the good manufacturers will have these dimensions available so that you can do a bit of calculation on what you have available or need and things like that. And we saw on that specialized print that we were looking at before, they give us our maximum insertion. Well, if I have if I know what my insertion is, and granted we have a little bit of thing, Brent's going to work on trying to add some feature to at least let you know about that later. But then we have all this and we can see kind of in advance of even buying a bike what our maximum dropper might be that we'd end up using. Actual user, if you know your saddle height, you know how much room it takes up, and you're doing all this stuff, you can go, oh, I could, if I buy this bike, I can get myself into a 240 millimeter dropper instead of a 200 millimeter dropper, just by choosing this bike over that bike, other things being equal, because they gave you that room or something like that. And those are things you should, as a rider, be looking at. I mean, I tried to say this is for designers and riders. Riders are making a lot of decisions when they buy a bike. You can either paint yourself into a corner or set yourself up for success. You know, that's your choice. And so the more you know about this, because the manufacturers don't seem to be providing any information in an informed way, you're going to have to do it yourself. Okay, I said before, working with the right bike. That's you know as a fitter, how many people come into you after just having spent a lot of money on the wrong bike?
Too often.
All the time. Size and do all this stuff beforehand, and then at least if you're doing fine tuning or stem and handlebar or saddle adjustments or stuff like that, you're starting with a bike that seems to be right in the first place, not is hopelessly wrong and you're desperately trying to just make it function. Especially if you're spending full pop retail at these prices, it's like, do some homework, you know, because I don't know about anybody else, but spending $8,000 on a bicycle is very frivolous and a hell of a lot of money. It might make sense to spend, you know, an hour or two just kind of going over the numbers, maybe, especially if you think you're a shredder or a masher or whatever the cool kids call it, you know. So I think we're going to run out of time. How much time do you think by their word do we have here then? 6:15?
5 minutes, 7 minutes.
All right, hold on tight. Okay, this is that bike that we were talking about before. It's got the color-coded stuff. Okay, now it's too complicated to talk about a whole bike right now, so we're just gonna work on the front end. Okay, now this is a bike. These center of mass numbers are for the bike in its saddle down position. Changes the center of mass slightly. I'm effectively standing on the pedals, and I'm over here. And we're going to look at front end values. That's the bike as it stands. And my example intention was, okay, but you're PVD, you run these wacky ass handlebars. I'm not some goon. I'm a cool guy on pink bike. I can't run that kind of stuff, you know. What I think someone said, set it on fire was a comment, you know. Okay, so let's just say you can't bring yourself to do it because you're too damn cool. I get it, you know. Peer pressure is a thing. So, from here to here, I actually just to make it easier, I took out that spacer that I had added on the lower headset stack, and I normalized it. So we're starting again. I've changed a couple numbers just to kind of normalize it. You say, corrected lower headset to 1 millimeter for consistency. This is going to be our starting point. Now we're going to go to another bike. Okay, you dropped in a 35 millimeter stem and some 28 millimeter rise bars. What's that, 1 1/4 or something like that? Traditional bars and stem. Notice throughout all of this, we're going to keep our hand grip position consistent because we know where we want our hands, right? That's something that's part of our fit. We want our hands where we want them. So we can fix that point. But to do that, to put these on here, we had to slack the head tube angle to 59.3 degrees. Even in today's market, that would be considered extremely slack. Now, I said earlier that head tube angle was trivial, and I believe it. But the thing is, we're not working with a full rigid bike here. We're talking about a suspension fork. It's like a 160 fork, right? Any folks know what stanchion bind is? Stanchion bind is a real thing. The more you slack your head tube angle, and if the force vectors are going normal to Earth, you're trying to fold your fork right where the bearings are. And that stops it from moving. So when you end up with seriously, that's why I've got steep head tube angles. I'm trying to get my fork to work better, not worse. Remember we talked about design for 99% of your ride? In what percent of most people's ride on trail do you think that head tube angle is going to align with the forces going through the fork? An extremely small percentage of the ride. Now, for the other 99% of the ride, is it going to effectively start locking out that fork? Yeah, stanchion bind is going to be wicked on this thing. The more weight you put on the front end, the less that fork is even going to want to move. So that's kind of bad. Also, we started with 101 millimeters of trail and 39 millimeters of flop. Now we're up to 147 millimeters of trail and 75 millimeters of flop. You want to talk about wacky. That thing's going to feel like a clown bike. And it's not going to feel light at all. It's going to feel like a ton of bricks because we've just effectively multiplied by 1.5 on our mechanical trail, right? Okay, so we go, I'm cool, but I'm not that dumb, right? We're going to change our setup, and we're going to use an imaginary fork. This fork has 90 millimeters of offset. Before, we were on a fork that was otherwise available. Handlebar, everything's available here. Now we're in a land of imagination, where, and this is why I said earlier, prototyping with full rigid bikes gives you the advantage of changing all these stuff, and you could do this. Well, you could do that with suspension forks if you're building suspension forks, but not too many people are. Anyway, so to keep our hand grips in exactly the same place, and we're correcting, we're going to increase the fork offset. So we got our front wheel trail down, but we still got a fairly high flop right here at 52 instead of 39. And to keep our hands in that same position, we had to run an 81 millimeter stem, you know? So we kind of made it better, but we're using an imaginary fork. It's not great at this point. We've still got insane stanchion bind, but maybe it's not steering as horrifically heavy as it did before. Okay, so we say, well, we're going to fix that. Oh, we're smart. We're going to increase the head angle. We're going to fix the stem length, and we're going to reduce the offset, still with an unavailable offset of 75 millimeters. But we've kept, again, our grips are in exactly the same, pretty much exactly the same location. I think there might have been a deviation there. But if you notice now we're at a 62 degree head angle. That's still too slack, I think, from a stanchion bind situation. I think anytime you get below 65 and you're not downhill racing or really enduro racing, you're really doing yourself a disservice because it's really causing more problems than it's helping you out at all. So we're using an imaginary fork, and we were able to get our trail is all right, but we're still high on our flop. It's still feeling pretty goofy. Okay. Now we get wise, and we reverse our stem. We turn our stem backwards because does the stem care which way it's pointed? It doesn't, does it? It's a pretty meaningless functional strut. It doesn't matter. In fact, I'd argue it's stronger when used reversed mechanically from a structure point of view. So we reverse the stem. Look at this. We got 40, our flop is a little off still, but we've brought our head tube angle to 67.3 degrees. And look, we're using a conventional fork. Our hand grips are in the same position. I'm sorry, I didn't mention, in every one of these examples, notice our front center is staying 850 the whole time. Our front wheel and our grips are in the same location in every example because those are things we really care about. We're trying to fine-tune steering and handling details of the front end, okay? And then we reverse the stem, so 67 millimeter stem reversed. Well, what's the difference between this and the first example? Now, because we go, bro, I'm no kook. I'm not running my stem backwards like a noob. Like, this bike was put together at like the Canadian Tire or something, you know? So, okay, we're going to use a traditional stem. We're going to use traditional bars, except these are those big 16-degree SQ Lab bars. My head tube angle is 67.3, all this stuff, but I've reduced my front center 55 millimeters so that I can use these traditional components with a fairly steep head tube angle, and I've had to reduce my front center. Well, that's shorter than my wife's new bike, but this is supposed to be for me. I ride an 850. I don't run a sub 800. That's a road bike. So we bring it out because we say, okay, we're not going to run as steep a head tube angle. We're going to bring it down to 65. It's fairly, you can get away with 65. A lot of people are doing 65. Got our hand grips in the right place. We're using a conventional 40 millimeter stem. We're using those nice 16-degree back sweeps. And we've brought our front center out to 825. And you'll notice that you're starting to see a lot of bikes with the 820s in this size range. That's why. Because that's the most you can get away with for most people to fit on an aggressive, real-world mountain bike setup. But you're not going to get the 850, which is an inch longer than this that I tend to run, until you start doing some goofy stuff with your handlebars. Okay? I wanted to take you on that journey to a world of imagination. But this is what you can do when you're drawing your bike. This is what you can do when we have our geometry written down and we play with imaginary scenarios and play what if. But then we get this. And this is a bike you can build with conventional parts. Compared to most bike for sale, it's probably going to be a pretty nice bike. You know, there might even be a bike that's close to that. That's starting to happen. Specialized was one of the first with that one, where they really got to the limits of what can be done. But remember, it's the stem and handlebars that's limiting the system. So when you look at PVD's wacky setup, it's because I needed to decouple from this so that I could do anything I wanted with my front wheel and still have my hand grips where I wanted. And you know, when I change this, now we go back to I'm going back a slide. This is our COM angle, and we go from 63.8 to 52.8. Just by bringing it out that last little inch from the easy-ass stuff before, I've given myself an extra angle on my COM to front contact patch angle, which is far more stable when I'm going into the rough rock garden and things like that. I'm not going to go over the handlebars as easy. And that's how we're looking at it with the COM. This is just some math that I had up on the internet there. If you wanted to change one fork for another with a different offset, what would the length of the fork need to be? Because sometimes people are trying to do that. They don't want to disrupt the geometry of the rest of the bike. They just want to make a fork swap, but it's going to have a different offset. And this is the math. So you can see it's just some trigonometry and simple algebraic manipulation. Wheels, some people are confused about what wheel diameters are. It's just a bead seat diameter. So if you read a 622/64, well, it's 622 is your bead seat diameter. 64 is your tire height. So add twice your tire height, and that's 750. It's a very common mountain bike size to use in your drawings, a 750 diameter, because it's that size wheel, which is that's a 29 by 2.5, right? And it comes out to 750. I think they're kicking the screen off. All right, they're going to do that. Let's just flip through and we can. Okay, so I'm going to talk more about all this stuff. So we got through the pictures at least.